We are live. Welcome back to the After Action Project, episode 103. Tonight we are joined by Jason Paletta. We're going to be talking about his Contact Threat Mitigation Course. Jason joins us from Pillar Training Institute. Tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by Locked In Grip. Have you ever been in the middle of a string of fire, right? You're out there on the range, you're practicing, you're getting it dialed in, you're working on bill drills or whatever it is, and you lose that perfect connection that you had with your grip because your palms are sweaty, your knees are weak, and your arms are heavy. Well, Locked In Grip, it's a shooter's sports chalk that takes care of that for you. You can find out more information about it at lockedingrip.com. That's lockedingrip.com. It's a liquid shooting sports chalk made for shooters by shooters. The folks over there at the Complete Combatant brought that to the market for us. It's absolutely awesome. I've used it actually just about every time I'm on the range. I use it. It's impossible for me to forget it because it has a nice little carabiner clip on there. I just leave that hooked on my range bag. Doesn't leave that. Give myself a nice little smaller than a pea-sized dollop on the palm of my hands. Rub it in, and I'm good to go. I'll constantly be hunting for my ear protection. Are they on my heads? Are they on my leg? Or is it on my head, my legs? Where did I put my ear pro? The Locked In Grip, it stays right with my range bag. So check it out. Pick yourself up a convenient size bottle of Locked In Grip liquid shooting sports chalk at lockedingrip.com. The other show sponsor is the Range Buddy app. It's a collection of over 160 shooting drills, all sorted by the required target type and filterable by the drills that you want to work. We just rolled out the instructor marketplace on there. So if you're looking to find a reputable instructor, for either in-person training or virtual training, you can check that out through the Range Buddy app. It's available on iOS and Android. The Range Buddy Instructor Marketplace is completely free to browse. It's an independent marketplace, so each one of those instructors kind of set their own services and pricing there. But we have some great instructors on there for you. In order to be an instructor, you have to have some instructor credential and development beyond the basic NRA or USCCA instructor type. So all the instructors that are available through the Range Buddy app instructor marketplace take their training seriously, and they're reputable instructors. So check that out. Well, let's get into tonight's episode. It's going to be a little short one. It's going to be a short one for our viewers out there. Jason, introduce yourself to our listeners. Talk to us a little bit about what got you into the firearms training industry, and then we'll kick it over to Aaron, and then we'll circle right back around to the course.
All right, sounds good. So my name's Jason Paletta. I've been in law enforcement. Actually, I was in law enforcement for approximately 25 years. Right out of the military, I went to the police academy in 1998, and then just recently, February of this year, I retired. During my career, I spent over 10 years on the SWAT team, firearms instructor, gang task force, gang unit and detectives, you name it. I've done pretty much everything. And then I went as a special agent to another agency, and I served about 8 years on a violent crimes team. And then I retired, like I said, in February. In 2011, I actually left law enforcement due to the financial crunch. I spent almost 3 years overseas. I did a year and a half in Baghdad, assigned to the U.S. Ambassador's Protection Detail. And then I did almost another year and a half in Afghanistan doing diplomatic security there. But as far as my firearms background, it pretty much started when I got into law enforcement and then really took hold in about 2007.
Love it. So some executive protection in there. I'm going to be interested to follow up with that here shortly. Aaron, to introduce yourself to our listeners. Talk to us a little bit about your background in the firearms world and what brought you to Jason's course.
Thanks for having me, guys. My name is Aaron Moe. Currently in law enforcement. Work for District Attorney's Office here in Northern California as an investigator. Been in law enforcement for a little over 22 years now. Similar path as Jason. Been on the SWAT team, gang task force. Any of the door kicking type of fun stuff that we all sign up to do. As far as my firearms background, lifetime student. I've always enjoyed taking classes, kind of focus that as being an instructor, always trying to learn a new way to either make something faster or more efficient. what got me to Jason's class was basically just, again, my enjoyment as a student. I'm always seeking something new, something to learn, to kind of mold my craft. And I found that with Jason's class.
You mentioned you're an investigator in the DA's office. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Jason, did you know that background when Aaron first signed up for your course, or how does that make you feel? For me as an instructor, it's always exciting when I have somebody that's on that side of the self-defense world, whether it be an attorney, somebody in that world. Kind of, what are your thoughts on that, as having Aaron as a student in your class, knowing that he's an investigator for the DA's office?
Well, I think being an investigator for the DA's office, that's no different than being a detective for another agency. It's just kind of a role where you're catering to the attorneys in the office and doing their follow-ups. And but what really drives me with this is the Contact Threat Mitigation course that I designed was specifically designed for law enforcement. And whenever I can get law enforcement to take this class on their own dime, I mean, that tells me a lot about the officer to begin with, or the investigator. So I would just say it's very humbling that they're going to come out and seek training for me on a topic that I put together that they believe in.
I love it. Aaron, I'm kind of from the student's perspective, how do you feel that shaped your actually, let's circle back into that. We'll get back into that later. Jason, talk to us about the Contact Threat Mitigation course. Who is it designed for, specifically within law enforcement, right? Is it for your average patrol officer? Is it for SWAT guys? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, you can look at whether you're on SWAT, whether you're on patrol, whether you're a detective, it doesn't matter. So just to give you a little story on it. So back in, I would probably say 2007, we were doing a qualification at the law enforcement agency I was at. And one of the strings of fire was firing 2 rounds from the hip at, 2 or 3 yards. And then you go to the holster, then you walk back to the 7. And for me as an officer, I was like, well, what the hell happens after you fire these 2 rounds and you go back to the holster? There has to be some follow through, because there was nothing, I felt we were setting up the officers for failure rather than success. So I kind of went through it. I started looking at the statistics back then. And, of course, we're in 2024. The statistics are still there. In fact, they've gotten worse against officers. But this really focuses on anybody in law enforcement that is out in the field doing investigations, whether it's contacting suspects, so either searching, arresting, whatever the case is. If you're in that close proximity with somebody that you're doing an investigation on, this course is going to apply to that.
Aaron, talk to us a little bit about the gear requirements and what you brought with you.
I've actually taken the class twice from Jason. I enjoyed it enough once the first time that I brought a buddy back the second time. When I went through it the first time, I was basically wearing my gear that I'd wear if I was going to make entry on a location. So just basically a standard duty belt, standard Safariland style holster, magazine pouches, etc. And that was from more the standpoint of run what you wear and everything like that. When I went back the second time, I took it more from my investigator standpoint of what I wear normal. My daily wear is something similar to what I'm wearing now, as a simple polo shirt, BDU style pants. In the second iteration, I wore appendix carry and worked on my draws and tried to break down how am I going to clear my garments and everything like that in an up close and personal distance. And that to me was where I was starting to break down time and trying to become more efficient with what I was doing.
Jason, do you find that most of your students are running their everyday duty gear?
That's on average. So it depends on, again, what assignments they have. I've had people come in wearing, maybe a belt slide holster on their strong side that's covered by a garment, or I've had people like Aaron come in that, they wear appendix inside the waistband, obviously covered by a garment. And then I've had patrol people come through that just wear their duty belt. So it's from one spectrum to the other.
Do you find that students are showing up to the class with unnecessary gear or gear that you would just wish you would see just kind of go away from the range?
That's a good question. So for the most part, you see people with squared away gear, but there's always those ones that trickle in with the drop leg holsters. I'm not a fan of drop leg holsters at all. Usually when they're running those, it's hanging way too low. I'm sure you guys have seen it on the range. It's not conducive for the environment that they're in, or the efficiency of getting your firearm out of your holster. So with those, I have a talk with them. We bring it up a little higher. We set them up, the best that we can. But for the most part, everybody seems to be running good gear and in the right spot.
So to be clear on this course, this isn't for just a duty gear. It could be any law enforcement duty gear, off-duty gear. It doesn't really matter. Is that correct?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't. So though this was designed for law enforcement, I would say it also has an alternate, point where you look at civilians that are carrying guns, and in the civilian world, it's when they have to use their gun, it's usually because they're being assaulted or robbed or anything like that. So it kind of falls into the same criteria of that up close and personal gunfight.
Okay. Give us a breakdown. Kind of, if I asked you to give me kind of a quick summary on what the course does and what the course means, how would you give that to us?
So contact threat mitigation, it's kind of changed the thinking of how we deal with up close and personal threats. Police academies for years and years, and even still today, are still teaching that if you have a threat like up close and personal, you kind of push off, make space, and then come up and deliver rounds on your threat. The problem is with you moving backwards, and I say this in every class, is like, can they move faster forward than you can backwards? And the answer is always going to be yes. You watch YouTube channels or YouTube videos of this actually happening, and I would say quite often the person that is breaking distance and moving backwards usually falls down, and the suspect is either on top of them or really close to it. So what I've done with contact threat mitigation is kind of changed it around, and now we meet at that close proximity. We're going to meet force with force. And the best way I can describe this is, if you've ever played football, in high school or whatever, and you're on the line. So, what do they teach us there? When we're on the line and we come up under the shoulder pads and we're driving them back, right? So in this instance, well, we don't have shoulder pads, but what we do have is we have their chin. So if I'm going to block, I'm going to put my head down, I'm going to block, I'm just driving back with my chin and I'm pushing them back. And that gives me the time to draw my firearm and put rounds on target if it's again a lethal threat.
There was an incident here in New Mexico where a law enforcement officer tragically lost his life. And it was like he arrived on a somewhat routine call. He was approaching somebody that was trespassing. The guy got verbally aggressive, but it was one of those instances where the law enforcement officer, he had to close the distance, right? You just can't leave if you have a property owner calling you up saying, hey, there's somebody on my property. And then the suspect drew a knife on him he was probably 3 to 5 yards away. And we saw just that, where the officer tried to backpedal faster than the guy could move forward, right? And he lost his footing. So where do you, kind of in that vein, is this a shooting class? Is this unarmed stuff? Is it kind of a mix between where you're going to, you're in the officer is involved in the altercation and you have to use some kind of hand-to-hand techniques to create the distance or subdue the suspect? Where does this kind of fall into that world?
It's 100% a shooting class. It's from the time we get on the range and I start going into, I break it down, because one thing that we always work on is efficiency of being able to get your gun out on target and putting rounds. So with this, it all starts with the draw sequence. That's where I start. I start just simple draw sequence. This is what we do. This is why I do the draw. And the draw doesn't change from whether I'm up close and personal or if I'm, 10 yards away. it's going to be the same draw sequence, but changing it to this allows me to, drive that person back and then put rounds on target as I'm using force against force rather than backing away.
Are we learning to lose? Excuse me, let me start that over. Are we learning to use our sights on this one? And the reason why I want to ask this is, you always hear the term that gets recycled, point shooting. So explain that a little bit more on that detail as to what you're doing. Is it we get sights on if we have the ability, or what does that look like?
So the majority of it starts out as point shooting. That close proximity, you're shooting from, and just go through the draw sequence. You have your master grip, and then you come to retention, which is going to be on your side. And then you go to compress, which is high compressed. And then I can come out to presentation. At each point, while you're going through the process, you're going to be delivering rounds from retention. So from your side, and then you're still creating distance. And then you're going to move up to your, going through your draw sequence. You're going to deliver rounds from compressed. And then by the time you create the distance and you already got rounds on target, now you can present, go to presentation because you've created that distance. So you're going to be firing rounds all through the draw sequence, not till you get to, 3/4 of the way through it where you're actually going to have a sight picture or your dot on target.
Gotcha. Aaron, what was your biggest takeaway on the course? What's something that really gave you the aha moment, or something that really gave something to you that you could take away for not only yourself, but your future students?
For me, it was, when you get in your standardized training, they drive home accuracy and distance equals time and et cetera. Jason's class kind of reverses that theory as far as with a lack of distance, you have a lack or a reduction in time as far as reaction to threats or reaction to the targets in front of you. To me, that was where you started really driving that part home. It's like, okay, if I have a half second or a full second to get out and get into it, where am I at with my draw capacity? Where am I at as far as, if I have to go hands on and break away? That was the big takeaway for me. Going through Jason's class too, you also learn that your attack doesn't always come from the front. And it was kind of working that same theory as far as, okay, if something comes at me from my side or from behind, how am I turning myself into that threat or basically getting into it at that point?
You brought up a good point, right? And if we look at civilian encounters, I'd imagine that there are similarities between the threats that law enforcement officers and concealed carriers or everyday citizens face, right? But there are some challenges and threats that are unique to the law enforcement officers, right? And specifically when we're looking at targeted attacks or ambushed attacks. Jason, kind of if we could take a step back and look at the training within the law enforcement field as a whole, where do you think the law enforcement academy training is really failing students, and what part of that do you hope to address in your course?
So the academies, it's like the circle of death. They have tactics that they've been teaching for 20 years because they had one range master running the academy. Then they have, the firearms instructor that's going to step up and replace that range master. And all they're doing is just repeating the cycle. That's why I call it the circle of death. Nobody ever gets out of that circle and goes out and seeks additional training anywhere else. So I think where this course kind of bridges that is now we have a different perspective on it that they're not getting in the academy because it's so outdated. That's the biggest issue that I have with academies is it's outdated material, and they're just going off a checklist of what they have to cover for liability reasons to get the person through and graduate.
That makes sense, right? If we look at qualifications, Andy and I talk about this all the time here in New Mexico. The qualification course of fire for a concealed carry is just ridiculous, man. We've had a legally blind student pass it, and it's like, why Bob? Right? Why? This man cannot get a driver's license, but had he not been auditing the class, right? Had he gone through it, he would have passed the qualification. And in law enforcement, it's commonly heard or spoke about that it's to get the greatest number of cadets through the shooting portion, right? And it's not even about, and I don't even know if it's, you correct me if I'm wrong, I don't even know if it's about getting them to a minimum set of skills, right? Because when I talk to folks, one of the things I always ask, right, is, you know, I have a couple buddies that have gone through the academy recently. It's like, hey, in your class, how many people are struggling to pass the qualification? And usually a half dozen or so. And I'm like, well, what are they doing to get them better? And they just have them reshoot the qualification for the majority of the time. And I'm like, that's not the solution, right? And the bigger problem is you're putting people out there that might have to draw their firearm in the line of duty, and they're not equipped to use it. So Aaron, talk to us a little bit about what that first day of the class looks like for you as a student. And what's one thing you wish you would have done differently to prepare yourself for the class, if there is one?
First day of the class, I mean, Jason does a good job as far as breaking down his expectations, as far as what the goals of the class are, what he wants you to walk away with. So, I mean, going into it, there's not a lot of surprise as far as what he expects of you or as far as his performance, what he wants to drive into it. He breaks down the steps in a very methodical way as far as you can see the type of teaching covers a wide gambit of individuals as far as he presses those that are more advanced, and he can slow it down for those that need more basic help. And he kind of brings everybody up into the table, so we're all kind of sitting on the same playing field. As far as initially going into it, it's one of those things where you kind of, it's the unknown. So it's like, how do you prepare? But I mean, going into it, I mean, like I said, you got to run the gear that you carry. I mean, that to me that's why I take classes. As far as firearms related, is I like to test my gear. And if I have a failure point with something, either I fix it or I get rid of it. I mean, we all have a box in our garage that's full of stuff we don't use no more that we spent hundreds of dollars on. But I mean, that's just the price of doing business. So, I mean, that to me was taking it the next time with the appendix style setup, was just trying to hone that craft some more. I wish I would have done that the first time as well.
That brings up a good. Sorry.
Go ahead, Andy.
That brings up a good point. You know, you mentioned the box of $100 box of holsters and all other crap that we don't use anymore. If we had this imaginary box that we could put in the closet of things that we've learned over the years and how much we've taken and drawn and gotten rid of it and added things, I think that's pretty regular and common. So, can you think of something, Aaron, that maybe you did that once you took this course, it was like, okay, that's not valuable to me, so therefore it's a change that I'm gonna put on my quote unquote toolbox?
So like when I go to classes, I mean, you run across people that they really buy into people's Kool-Aid as far as, you know, they think that this instructor is the only one out there. This is the way it is, and stuff like that. For me, in my background, I try to broaden that as far as I can. And when I go to classes, I look for more nuggets. I look for, like you're saying, that aha moment or something I can do to shave off time or gain that better experience. I mean, you know, so when I go through a class, I don't look at it as something like not going to do that. When I go into something, I'll try whatever's there. And if I could spin it in some direction that'll help me out or help somebody else out that I may teach in the future, I do that. I mean, you guys know from your background, and Jason said it earlier, you get a wide range of individuals showing up to classes, so you can't just teach a way. We oftentimes teach multiple ways to get a task done. So, I mean, that's what I like to walk away with from instructors is, well, I like how Jason did this, or I like how Jeremy did that, etc.
Jason, I want to get yours and Aaron's perspective on this. You know, I talk to Andy all the time, and he's out there. He's already taken like 4 classes this year, plus TACCon or some crazy amount. And it's one of the things that we hear with our students on here is there's an overlap, right? Like you're showing up to this class, Andy knows 2 or 3 other guys, and he's trained with 1 or 2 or 3 of those same guys in another class the year prior to that. Do you see the same kind of thing in your classes, Jason? Where it's a lot of these folks that are, you know, they have almost like a pre-existing training relationship with a buddy that just kind of happens to randomly show up in class together?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, as you guys know, especially Andy, you know, you take these classes, then you meet people. Next thing you know, it's like, hey, let's take this class. Let's take this class. So I would say, as the time goes forward and, I put on more of these classes, then I'll have more people showing up that have repeat people that have come before, but now they're either bringing friends or, you got 2 or 3 people that are there together rather than them showing up by themselves. So you do have people bring others to the class.
And same kind of question. Do you find yourself bumping into those same folks? And what would you tell the cadet that's in the academy or fresh out of the academy? What advice do you have, or how do we get them to get that training bug?
So, like Jason said, yeah, you go to classes with buddies and stuff like that. A lot of times if I travel out of the area, I try to find somebody to go with, kind of split the costs and stuff. We also have a better kind of communication breakdown as we drive home from that class. Hey, what'd you like? What do you think we can do better? To me, that's where one of the learning points is like, oh, I didn't think of that, or I didn't see that. So, getting a different angle from something is always a plus for me. The first time I took Jason's class, I took my wife with me at that time and threw in basically as a civilian and doing CCW. And I'm like, you're going to run into this scenario. As a female, you're going to get attacked and everything like that. And she ran through the course. The second time I took it, I had my 16-year-old son with me, and he was just getting into competition shooting and use of the firearm and everything like that. And I kind of put him through some of the drills that we went through when I took it the first time to kind of build him up, like, okay, here's your expectation and stuff. But to me, that's the fun part, is as a dad or a boyfriend or a husband or anything like that, to have somebody in their family is to kind of put them in a situation where they're not just on a standard range learning something. They're learning how to fight. And to me, that's the important part. That's the investment of paying for the class, the ammo, etc. From teaching in an academy, I teach firearms for an academy here in Northern California. I always explain to them that it's a perishable skill and they need to seek out training, because like Jason said, if you have the old crusty range master that, teaches stuff that he learned when he was shooting revolvers 40 years ago or something like that, you're behind the times. If you're going up against a guy with a switch on his Glock and you're only bringing what you bring for the day, you may not be ready for that fight. And to me, that's the important part. That's the thing, as far as invest in yourself, invest in your future, invest in yourself for the benefit of your family, so you know how to fight.
Jason, are you seeing that change with law enforcement now? Are you seeing an increase in students coming in and wanting to actually learn the skill of firearms? Because it seems to me, like just watching social media and the feeds, etc., that we're starting to see an uptick in law enforcement guys that are coming out of the academy and they're taking it a bit more serious. Am I seeing that right or no?
Yeah, again, social media is social media. I would say yes and no. You still have people that'll show up to work that they wouldn't carry a gun if they didn't have to. It's disheartening. I've worked with these people. But on a most recent thing, yeah, I've seen a little uptick of more officers taking classes, but it's never enough. What was that? There was a video that I saw it last week. Was it Oklahoma, where they fired all these rounds at the suspect and the suspect never got hit? I forget. I think that was Oklahoma, but that's embarrassing. And that's scary. It's like you're out there protecting not just yourself, but the public, and you can't put rounds on target with 7 people shooting. There's got to be something has to come forward to make these guys want to go out and train, and gals. And I don't know exactly what it is, but I would say the biggest thing is probably a generation thing as well.
I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I think the issue too that law enforcement guys are seeing, tell me if I'm wrong, is kind of the politics of the whole deal of, liabilities now. Our governor here in New Mexico just made it to where you can sue law enforcement officers personally. So then I think it goes along with those that are brave enough, I guess, to be a law enforcement guy, I think they may have a little bit of a fear too of this stuff too. Would you agree?
I would agree. And just to touch on that also is, so I did my master's degree. I got it in 2019 in emergency management, but I did my thesis on, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but AB 392, that's where California, the governor says, okay, it has to be necessary force rather than reasonable force. And that was like a kick in the gut. I mean, because now you have people so scared to go out there and, pull their gun out and use it because they're scared they're going to do the wrong thing. And then, like you said, get sued. But during my thesis, when I went through all this, and I went through statistics and everything, and it all falls back to training. Training 100%. So I think the liability issue, what people need to understand is your agencies, it may be a great agency, but at the end of the day, they only care about their, that they're checking the box that they provided this amount of training for you just to get by through the state, rules and regulations or whatever they have to go by. It's going to be up to the officer to go out there and get that extra training.
Man, I can't remember where I first heard it, but they were talking specifically about law enforcement and recruiting in law enforcement and how we see this kind of, tough times create strong men create easy times create weak men. And these police departments will recruit people that have never been into a fight. They've never gotten into an altercation. And if we look at if we look at a good percentage of law enforcement, use of force instances, at what point can we all agree that, hey, sometimes if you go hands-on a little bit more aggressively, a little bit sooner, it will stop the altercation from escalating to a higher use of force incident, right? And sometimes you just got to pop a dude in the face because he can't get himself under control, and he's going to escalate beyond a reasonable level, right? But again, you have folks that have never been involved in an altercation, and they don't have that confidence. And I think that's a huge piece that policymakers are missing, right? Is the level of confidence that you have if you can perform under stress and what your abilities are. If you can handle yourself in a street fight, maybe you don't go to the gun as quickly as you would have otherwise, right? So now you have some tools between just getting yelled at and shouted at to having to pull your gun and draw down on somebody. And it kind of gives you a little bit more reaction, right? So as an instructor, for this course specifically, what do you want your students to walk away from this class knowing or being confident in of themselves?
So this course, I want them to walk away with, the ability or the mindset is, I don't need to back away. I'm going to be more successful if I drive forward and meet force with force, because, one of the quotes that I always say in this class, Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. There's so much truth to that. So if I can get them to walk away saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to meet force with force, and I'm not going to give them the opportunity to come after me. I'm going after them. So it's almost like you turn it around as like, I'm going to meet their force with my force. They're not coming after me.
I love it. Aaron, where do you think this class should fall on a law enforcement officer's continuum of training, right? Should they take a class? Should they have a class before this one, or are they able to show up kind of as they are out of the academy?
I think that if they could demonstrate good gun handling skills, I mean, it's a different part of the process, and like you go through it, and if you have a good basic foundation of gun handling skills, I think you walk through this class and you'll be able to pick up a lot. If you're the kind of individual that has to think about, okay, I need to draw, I need to point, I need to shoot, and you're breaking down those steps, you might feel a little overwhelmed. But I mean, Jason's pretty good as far as I've watched him work the line, and the more advanced shooters, he presses them forward, gives them a smaller target to deal with, or demands quicker time response from them. The individuals that are struggling a little bit, he'll put more one-on-one with them and make sure that they're safe in what they're doing and grasping the ideas and the concepts that he's trying to teach them. So, I mean, I think if you have the academy level, it should be taught at the academy level, is my personal opinion. And it's one of those things that should be resurfacing throughout the career as far as, just dealing with upfront personal contact. I mean, that's just what it is. So,
Jason, do you provide a certificate with the end of this course that they pass? And would that provide any value for law enforcement to take back to their department and say, here, look at this piece of paper, I did something? Or does it really matter and just really based on their skill improvement, which is ultimately the more important part? I want to be clear on that.
Right. So it depends. I will provide certificates upon request if they want one. But and I'm sure New Mexico has it too, but we got police officer standards and training. So usually agencies won't pay for an officer to go get training unless it's a post-certified course, because one, they end up not having to pay for the course if it's a Schedule 4 or whatever it is, where the state will pay for it. So I think most importantly is that they come out and they get the experience, they get the training. Usually agencies, hey, good for you. You got training. Awesome. Why don't you share it, see if they like it or, whatever the case is. But usually it's not going to be accepted if it's not a post-certified class.
Can you talk a little bit before we get off about the range of skill set that you see on a normal class and how you manage that as an instructor?
Usually the prerequisite for this class is that you have to have taken at least a Pistol 1 class from a reputable instructor. And it's, we get people that will call and say, hey, I've had this class with this certain person. I'm like, I really don't know who that is. But, if you are comfortable and safe handling your gun, your firearm, and you want to come out and take this class, I said, I will judge that when you get here, but don't be discouraged if I ask you, hey, you need to step off the line because it's unsafe or it doesn't meet, certain criteria, because the last thing I'm going to do is run an unsafe firing line.
That makes sense. Is this a class that you hold local to yourself, or do you travel around the country with it?
So I just recently, since I retired, I started traveling. I just left. I was at Big Tech's Ordnance Range in Texas. I'm scheduled to be at the ranch in Texas. I think next month. In June, I'll be at the Ohio Tactical Officers Association. This will be my third or fourth year that I've been teaching this class there, and the class usually always fills. And then I'll be in South Carolina and then Idaho.
Nice. You mentioned reputable instructors. What are some reputable instructors that you would recommend for your students to train with? If, say they're not local to you and you're not going to be in their neck of the woods, who's some training that they should seek some guidance and instructorship from? There's quite a few of them out there. You got Dan Brokos, you got Jared Reston, Mark Smith, JBS training. That guy, he's actually on my bucket list. I haven't trained with him yet, but that's one that I will hopefully this year get into one of his classes. Scott Jelinski's great. I've taken his Red Dot class several times. Man, there's so many of them out there to choose from. So you can, you just look at their followers, you look at their reviews, and that'll tell you if they're worth putting your time and money into that training or not. Hey, Aaron, kind of in that same vein, what are some qualities as an instructor when a student's looking at training with an instructor? What are some things that they should be looking out for, either green flags or red flags? And then briefly talk to us about what initially drew you to Jason as an instructor.
Some of my green flags for me is when an instructor is willing to walk up and put it on the line. It's the individual is like, okay, this is how we do it. They demonstrate it. I've been to classes before where you just have the instructor in the background yelling out the course of fire and they're not doing it themselves. To me, it's kind of similar to baseball. Some of us go up and swing, we hit a grand slam. Other guys are going to strike out. And we can't be intimidated by that as far as being an instructor or worrying about doing that in front of a student. So, to me, that's one of those things where those guys will go up and they're first in line. They'll show you how to do it. And to me, that's a big positive. I'm not the guy that needs like the super big words or the scientific breakdown or something. Talk to me normal. I'll take it in a lot better that way. I don't need to know about ocular reset or anything like that at all. It's just not one of those things that's gonna stick with me. But I mean, just speaking in generality, using good examples as far as where this tactic or this performance could help you out in a situation, that's beneficial to me. The red flags are the guys that say we do this just because, or this has always been the way. I mean, those are the guys that won't break the mold. They'll just take what they've learned 30 years ago and keep trying to pedal it forward. To me, that's the ones that I try to avoid. Like I said, I'll go through somebody's class. I'm not going to judge them based off of that. I look for that one gold nugget, that one takeaway. A lot of times when I go to classes, I try to take really good notes. Some instructors get intimidated, like I'm trying to take their class and to steal it from them and take their curriculum to go teach it myself or something. For me as a student, if I'm going to invest $500 to $1,000 in a class, let alone what it takes to get me there, I really hated a couple months down the road trying to rethink what I did in that class. If I have some good notes to go off of, I can go out and recreate those drills and I can see if my performance has improved. So it's kind of funny. I'm the guy in the back, kind of like, all right, writing stuff down. Okay, we did this drill. This was my time. And again, for me, it's just a performance thing as far as am I holding the line? Am I falling short? Have I improved? So watching instructors, if they're really those guys that hold it close to their chest and they're not willing to share, that to me is a red flag. But if you get some of those instructors like, dude, whatever you're getting from me, I stole from somebody else, I'll just put my own spin on it. To me, I take that as a lot more beneficial than being open to their craft and their willingness to share with it.
A yellow flag for me is the big words. The bigger, the more often they use big words, the less I want to train with them. I'm not going to be out there with a dictionary and a thesaurus. And I know we got to wrap up here, but I have one last question I want to get in before we jump off the air. There are two things that I bring with me to every range session other than, my handgun, my ear pro, my ammo. That's the Range Buddy app because it fits in my pocket, all the drills. But you can track your performance on each drill that you want to run and see how you do on the leaderboard. And then the other one is locked in shooting grip that we talked about at the opening show or at the opening of the show. And that's just so I have one less thing to worry about. And I can really make sure that I get my grip locked in there. Is there anything that you guys, either of you, would recommend a student bring with them to class to make it a more enjoyable experience or allow them to be more efficient on the range, whether it's a bunch of mags or what have you? Is there anything that you recommend students bring?
For me personally, an open mind is the biggest thing. You walk in there, like I said, you may really love what the person has to say, or you may not. You can't, if you don't or you don't agree with it, you can't shut down and have that just be the end of your day. That's the important part to me. As far as gear, the old tried and true of one is none, two is one. I usually bring an extra gun, extra set of mags if that gun's different. Just because I don't want to stop training because something breaks. I always want to have the backup or the extra parts to make sure I get through the course. Because like I said, if you're traveling, a couple hours away or a couple days away from your house, it's not like you just run to the store and pick up a part. So I always try to bring the extra gear to make sure I get through the course.
Yeah. And as for me, I think the number one thing you said is you have to come with a good attitude and be willing to learn. I mean, you're already putting yourself out there to, pay for this class, come out and learn. And just because you don't agree with certain aspects of the course, it doesn't mean, the whole course is going to be just rated off of that one part of the class. So to have an open mind and go through it, because you know what, that's only just a snapshot in time. As you go through the course, there'll be other nuggets that'll be thrown out, that they can pick up. So open mind is number one for me.
I love it. Andy, you got any final thoughts or questions before we wrap up?
Other than the same thing, I always want to tell you guys, thank you for coming on. I know your time is important. especially like you, Jason. You're out there watching your kid right now practice, and Aaron, I'm sure you're doing something busy there on the computer. But we appreciate you coming on the show, spending a little bit of time on us, and sharing your information.
Thank you so much, guys. We appreciate it.
Good as well. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Y'all have a great night, and we'll see you next week.